I want to take us to this figure. I'm going to pull up the whole screen here for us, enlarge it. Let me see, can I get it larger? Will it enlarge for me? Okay, there we go. Saul of Tarsus. And nobody ever refers to Saul as Saul of Tarsus. It's always referred to as Paul, the apostle of the heathens. That's how in Christian sources it's usually described. What do I mean by apostle to the heathens? Jesus had 12 disciples. They are described as the apostles. And there's apostle meaning shaliach, an emissary. Chabad has shlichim. You all know them running around with the tefillin, catching everybody at airports. Mishulach or shaliach. And so possibly the Latin term for that. But Saul was never one of those original shlichim. He was later. And so he no longer came to preach to the Jews. He found his job in preaching to the Gentiles. So we want to go in, we need to understand really what was going on in the Judaism of its day, understand this change that this one Jew created that changed the fate of world history, more so than Jesus. As a Jew, I would say that. I can't say that to my Christian friends. For them, it's Jesus, the embodiment of the Spirit of God. So there's no question, but from Jewish perspective, that's how I would see it, right? And so when we are, as Jews, are debating with missionaries, Christian missionaries, usually they're coming from the classical old tack, Jesus the Messiah, based on verses such and such in the Bible. And then we will come back with Jesus not the Messiah based on certain conditions. The rabbis and centuries down in the centuries afterwards in Christian Jewish polemics said, look, there's no peace in the world, the animal's not lying down, the wolf is not lying down with the lamb, children of Israel have not yet been restored to the land of Israel. These are the things the Bible was talking about. None of that has happened. But that's not our real debate. And if we understand the sources, that's not where our real debate is. I mean, there are some small groups, we'll say splinter groups, the Jews for Jesus groups or Messianic Jewish groups that try to make the claim we're still trying to be Jews living as Jews, but we've just accepted Jesus the Messiah. But that is not Christianity. That is something very different in and of itself also. So we remember Christianity is a product of a very different Jew. So I'm going to use as my outline a summary of Saul, and his positions and where they come from and its importance, written in the Jewish Encyclopedia in 1906. You can get this for free online. You just type in jewishencyclopedia.com, and you have beautiful entries on everything Jewish up till the 1900s. And it is still considered the greatest academic work as a Jewish encyclopedia, greater than the ones that followed, like the Encyclopedia Judaica, which came out in the 70s, which you can still get. So somebody went and put this online, great service. So you look up topics and so on. So this is from Kaufman Kohler. He is a leading Reform rabbi, and but not above, but and also a great scholar in and of his own right. He was positing the strength of Judaism in the face of the dominant Christian civilization. And this is very interesting. Why would he want to do this? We usually think of reform as assimilationist, but this is it's like Joseph is assimilated into Egyptian society, but he's emphasizing God. You're working out God's policy. We're working out God's plan. In other words, as much as he is outwardly the Egyptian, he is the Jew. And so what Reform was doing was saying, okay, outwardly we are like our neighbors, but we are at core Jews. And at core Jews, we have core differences with Christianity. And that's what he was saying. So he is in this essay very critical towards Paul, much more critical than later scholars would be, by the way. A little bit more among later scholars like my professor at the Hebrew University, David Flusser, looking for a bridge between Paul and the Jews and trying to say that what Paul was doing was not break with Judaism in its entirety, but looking for a variant that would be that would bring in the Gentile world. Okay, so he's not interested in this though. He is, like all Jews, educated Jews of his day, a classical 18th and 19th maskil, enlightened Jew, hostile to mysticism, hostile to the mysterious elements of religion, hostile to the faith-based emphasis of religion as Christianity is. Right? This is looking for a reason-based religion. He sees Judaism as a reason-based religion. And his sources, knowledge of sources, very extensive. Christian scholars, Jewish scholars. What we also do know is that he was limited because the Dead Sea Scrolls had just been discovered, and there were just the beginnings of writings on the Dead Sea Scroll, not Dead Sea, I'm sorry, the Cairo Geniza. And the Cairo Geniza indeed does have documents that are very old, some going back to the 2nd, 3rd century after the year 0. And so they do shed some light on some of the Jewish movements of the period, but that itself, as I say, not enough information for him to go on. There was no yet Dead Sea Scroll either, for sure, nor also for the history of early Christianity, the discovery of documents at Nag Hammadi in Egypt. So what is Nag Hammadi in Egypt? This is a place where documents from the 1st and 2nd century Egyptian society were found. Some of these are early Christians. Some of these are documents from a movement that we know today as Gnosticism, G-N-O, Gnosticism, which means the secret knowledge. And this was a movement, it's not a central religion, but sort of a trend found in Greek, Babylonian, Egyptian, and Jewish circles. So we have to be aware of that. That also is a great figure in the development and the rise of Christianity, this whole movement. And some of it dates back before the time of Jesus. We know that Dead Sea Scrolls, for example, have records that, although they're from time of, to a great extent, up to the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, material going back a good century, 2 centuries before, and talking about a teacher of righteousness who seems to have some of the characteristics of a Jesus figure. Another thing that we also do know, there are many such charismatic figures that arise in this period. And the one who is actually recorded in Jewish sources, and the best source is Josephus, is actually John the Baptist. So in Christian sources, John the Baptist is the announcer. He comes and he discovers Jesus, so to say, and at the Jordan, at the baptism. And he's considered then parallel to Elijah being the forerunner of the Messiah. But as Josephus shows us, there's no connection between John the Baptist and Jesus, and some of the records show that. It's rather that John the Baptist is an example of a charismatic figure, had tremendous following, calling for Jewish piety, calling for a return to personal piety and purity in behavior, and the action of baptism, being washed. What is baptism? The Greek word for tefillah b'mikveh, which is what every good Jew did in antiquity. When he wanted to go to the temple, he had to be baptized. That's right. He had to go to the mikveh to be cleansed. And so going back then, it was also the idea of going to the mikveh to be cleansed emotionally, not just from physical, not just from technical impurities. Hasidim still do it till today, also going to the mikveh. So we see some of these things that proceed. So now what happens? We know that come the year 35, somewhere, give or take, this figure of Jesus is executed by the Roman authorities. And after his death, those who are his followers gather and continue in some of his practices and preachings, believing that he is indeed the messianic figure, waiting for him to come back. And they gather around them some Gentiles, because one of the things we don't appreciate is how widespread Judaism had become in the Greek and Roman world of this period. Certainly in the Mesopotamian world, because you had still large Jewish settlements from the first destruction of the temple, large and sizable. But it is in the Greek and the Roman world that you have this introduction to Judaism. It goes back to before the time of the Maccabees, where the Ptolemies of Egypt are fascinated. They order the translation of the Bible into Greek, right? The Septuagint. That's before the time of the Maccabees. And already Greek philosophers, after the conquest of Alexander, become introduced to Jews. And I'm very curious about Jews. And there's an interest in Jews. There's an interest in Judaism. And what historic demographers think is that by the time of the end of the First Temple period, 1/10 of the Roman Empire was Jewish or followers of Judaism. It was not necessarily formally Jewish, but had adopted Jewish practice customs, particularly among women, because they felt that there was security in the Jewish concept of the woman that they did not find in the Greek or the Roman world. So we have this groundworks where we have now non-Jews fascinated by Judaism, fascinated by the image of Judaism, but sort of feeling on the outs. And some of them gather around this early Jewish community. So now, what happens? Here's the interesting part. So we go ahead, and I'll give you some quotes from Paul, because there are some parts in Paul that in his writing style and so on, it's a writing style that we're not familiar with.
And by the way, I don't think about Paul when I'm doing mikveh.
John the Baptist.
You think
of John the Baptist.
John when I'm doing.
Yeah,
or Paul,
John the Baptist.
I'm in the mikveh.
John the Baptist ends with his head on a platter. You know that.
That's not a good day.
No. But it's not Herod, the famous Herod. It's another Herod, Herod Antipas, who's the one who has his head. And very simply, it's because John the Baptist is a political threat to the leadership, and it's sometime after actually Jesus is crucified. That's the theory. So anyway, there are some beautiful things from Paul. I'd like to give him credit, like this one on love. Paul's very big on the concept of love. And so let love be genuine, hate what is evil, hold fast to what is good, love one another with brotherly affection, outdo one another in showing honor, never flag in zeal, be aglow with the Spirit, serve the Lord, rejoice in your hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer, contribute to the needs of the saints, and practice hospitality. Right? He's coming in, he's building up his community. He wants the community to blend together, and he uses this love of each other, fellow love. I think agape is the word that's used in this in the Greek. I think caritas. Out of caritas, we get charity, right? Just as an aside, the English word for tzedakah is charity, right? But charity comes from the Latin caritas. You do it because you love the other person. That's actually closer to gemilut chasadim, acts of loving kindness. Whereas the word tzedakah in Jewish sources is justice. You have to do it. I'm not worried about, again, sort of typical of classic rabbinic thought. I'm not worried about your mood. I'm not worried about your emotions. I want to know what you do. Paul is a Jew of the diaspora. He's from Tarsus. That's very important to know. Where is Tarsus? It's in Turkey, modern Turkey. And he's raised as a Jew, but in a very Greek milieu. So in a Greek milieu, mood and idea is very important. In the Jewish classic rabbinic milieu, it's what you do. It's right. There's a shift here. Watch. But anyway, let's go ahead. Again, another famous quote. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or clanging cymbal. Right? No matter how saint I am, if I don't have love inside, I'm just a loud noise. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship, that I may boast, but I do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it's not self-seeking, not easily angered, keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. And this is a very famous quote here. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. Right? You'll sometimes see it quoted as faith, hope, and charity. What they mean is love. Right? I can't argue, right? I can't argue. It's a very powerful statement, and I want to give, there's certain things in Paul that certainly as Jews we have no quarrel with. But then where's Paul's specific points? He's the one who is now looking at the death and resurrection of Jesus as the central element of human existence. And he talks about resurrection of the dead. All this is coming from Corinthians, just if you know your books. He's got Acts of the Apostles, then there's certain letters to the Romans, letters to the Corinthians, to the Galatians, not Galatians, but Galatians. And so if there's no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been risen. If Christ has not been raised, our preaching is worthless, and so is your faith, right? You must have faith that Christ death. That's very central to him. If he did not raise, in fact, the dead are not resurrected. That is, again, the central faith element. If you do not have the faith that Christ was redeemed from death, then nothing is worth it. Right? Now we're coming into the shift. Now is another shift in this thinking. This is actually not from Paul, but later on, 1500 years later, Martin Luther. Martin Luther was a Catholic monk who was disgusted by the Catholic Church selling what they called dispensation. $1,000 and 1,000 Hail Marys and you're okay. All right? So he realized that they were getting out of bound. What was the Catholic Church emphasizing? The Catholic Church did not want to split completely with its Jewish roots on the idea of mitzvot ma'asiyot. Did not want to split completely. Catholic Church, and still will say, our roots are Semitic. Today, they'll use that term. Did not want to split completely. And at least in the area of certainly moral mitzvot, seen as obligations or personal obligations or sacraments, they're obligations you got to do. Luther felt that was an obstacle, and Luther went back to Paul. So if we understand modern European history, because Luther undid the Catholic Church, and undid its control on society, and made possible all the revolutions of Europe, it isn't going back to Paul. So you see how this guy influenced things in modern history. So Luther goes to Paul, based on Paul says, be a sinner and sin boldly, or sin more strongly. Right? You're going to do it, then enjoy it. But believe and rejoice in Christ even more boldly. In other words, that it's not that he's encouraging sin, but he is saying that the faith is so much more powerful. That's where he takes it. And of course, then his example is he's going to go and marry. Because from Paul, the church, and not just Paul, the church had a perspective that marriage was for the unredeemable other people, but you're going to be on the top, you're one of the clergy, you have to be above and beyond sex. So no, he had married clergy, right? And that was an example, because that could not disqualify a person from salvation or from being of a higher level, right? So that's Luther going back to Paul. And so now we can see how modern history, without Luther, there's no Protestant Reformation taking over Europe. There's no American ethos. There is none of this spirit of revolution, because it's with Luther that comes also the translation of the Bible into German and the first revolutions in Germany in his time. But he had to turn against him because they threatened to undermine what he was doing. But its big push was from him. So now let's go to Calvin Kohler. Okay, and some of his summaries. And we'll probably take some today, and maybe then we'll finish next week. There's a lot of material. Let's see. So now, here's how Kohler introduces Paul. the actual founder of the Christian church, as opposed to Judaism, right? So about the year 10, and dies around the year 63, right? So we do not know the exact documents of Paul and Paulinism, right? That's one of the problems that we have, that nobody was recording and saving the paper records or the papyrus records or the parchment records. And then on top of that, and this is true of Christian scriptures, they've been colored by the writers of the 2nd century, who wanted to paper over the disagreements and disputes and create an official document that would now be the document of the newly established church. And that is happening in the 2nd century, right? The year 100, 110, 120, and so on. And some of the documents then that are in the New Testament definitely are not from Paul, that we know, for example. One of the things that we also know is that at one point, the early Christian church discussed the possibility of getting rid of what we call the Old Testament, getting rid of their roots in Judaism completely. And so there's a great Christian thinker by the name of Marcion who said that we're going to throw it all away. This is an entirely new religion. Now, they were rejected. This church, as it's coming to shape, could not reject its biblical roots. So let's go ahead. What do we know about him? I say his name, he's born as Saul. But in the neighborhood where he grew up, it's a Greek neighborhood, Greek-Roman neighborhood. Tarsus it was called, is an area of Cilicia, middle of Turkey. Born of Jewish parents, right? So his neighbors called him Paul, and the parents gave him the name Saul at his bris. Saul, Shaul. And he liked to say that he was a descendant of Saul of the tribe of Benjamin, although there's no indication that he really was that, couldn't really prove it. One of the debates is that he claimed to be a Pharisee. By the time he was born, that had become the popular mode of Judaism, and it started to spread in the Greco-Roman world as well. He then said at some point he decided to go to the land of Israel and continue where he could fulfill his mitzvot and learn more Torah. And he made a claim that, or it is written of him, that he was a student of Gamliel, Rabban Gamliel. It is the follower, either the son or grandson of Hillel. The Talmud has a reference to Gamliel having a student who is a heretic. We're not sure. Kaufman says that the way that Paul writes, his quotations are not, the way they're worded are not based on the Hebrew text as we have it, but from the Greek text. Much more so, he's much more fluent in Greek thought than in rabbinic thought. That is how Kohler says it. So he says unlikely that actually would sit at the school of Rabban Gamliel. He may have wanted to do it, or maybe it's his own later centuries may have wanted to reflect that connection, and that may have been how it comes into the Talmud, because that source would have been written much later. So his thinking is entirely a Hellenist in thought and sentiment. I don't want to use the word pagan. When we use the word pagan, we think of guys just putting up offerings to idols and doing whatever he wants to, because that's what the pagan gods want. The Greeks and the Romans were becoming much more sophisticated. They were aware of thinkings coming out of the Greek schools of Athens and the schools of Aristotle and Plato being probably more popular really overall. And so their thinking is much more in line with that, and rather than what we can call old-fashioned paganism. Yeah. It is a Hellenistic perspective, and see the quote I put in the highlight: the whole creation groans for liberation from the prison house, the body, from its earthly existence which because pollution by sin and death is intrinsically evil. This is a perspective of Paul. It's a perspective of what I mentioned earlier, what is called Gnostic. You see this word I have also, Gnostic, Gnostic lore. And this is a movement which sees our human existence as a tragedy. Our life existence is some scheme created by an evil God. And what we need to do is to escape from it. And as I say, there are a lot of Jewish groups involved in it, Greek groups, Babylonian, Egyptian. And so it gets the name of Gnosticism. And in the Jewish groups that grew up around it, first is an antagonism to Torah and to the God of the Torah in these groups. The law ties me down. Who is it that gives me the law? The God of the Torah. Who is the hero? Cain. Not Abel, but Cain is the hero. Who is the hero in the Garden of Eden? The serpent. The serpent tried to redeem Adam from the God that created him. Right? That's this kind of thinking. The God of creation is a second-class God in this kind of thinking. Is the word they use is demiurge, which means a shaper. Beyond the true God, Rome is perfection. Right? These are, as I say, groups that are coming around this time period in the century before, the century after. One of the greatest rabbis we know, which is about 50 years after Paul, abandoned Judaism. And one of the theories, he was influenced by these groups. Elisha ben Abuya, and he's the teacher of Rabbi Meir, and was a colleague of Rabbi Akiva. And he is known in all rabbinic sources as Acher, meaning the other one. Didn't want to say his name. So tuf tuf, the other one said. And Rabbi Meir is unique in that he still studies under Elisha ben Abuya even after he has betrayed rabbinic Judaism. We're not sure what his direction is, because he may also have just gone in the direction of Greek Stoicism, atheism, without any kind of theology. Quite possible also. But the possibility is that he's caught up in this. So here's this kind of faith that is very popular, as I say, around the Greek and Roman world. And it has its impact in Jewish groups as well. Let's see if I can get this good on. Okay. So here's a new group. Here's a new faith. It's half pagan and half Jewish. Right? Mm-hmm. And right, Paul is affected by it. Right? And these are elements that are, as I say, different from Jewish thought, or in the Jewish circles, antagonistic completely. And notice what Kohler says here. For Judaism, religion is the hallowing of this life by the fulfillment of its manifold duties. Right? Classic rabbinic position. This life is sacred. It's made sacred by our actions. This is what one of my teachers said. This is what we call normative mysticism. It is not the mysticism to escape life. It is the mysticism to enhance life with the sacred. That's the key in Judaism. Paul is being influenced by these other trends of thought. Paul shrank from life as the domain of Satan and all his hosts of evil. He longed for redemption by the deadening of all desires for life and strove for another world in which he saw his ecstatic visions. Right? Over and over again in Paul's writings, he talks about the impossibility of picking ourselves up by one's own actions. Very central to Paul's thinking. A great break with Jewish thought. So now, go ahead. Let's say.
Was Paul married, Rabbi?
No. And he has a split attitude towards marriage. On one sense, he has a very beautiful quotation I didn't bring in, and it's usually misquoted. He says in the family, just as Jesus is the head of the church, so the husband is the head of the family, the wife listens to the husband. But then he continues and says the husband must love the wife, and the wife must love the wife. It's a mutual love. He's coming to that. So in that sense, he seems to be enhancing and howling the idea of marital life. But then he has another line which says, it is better to be married than to burn in hell. In other words, because you're human and because you're bound by your human body, you're going to be burnt up by this passion. So at least let's engage it in marriage, because that's what. But if you don't have it, if you don't have to get married, don't get married. And that has its influence in the Christian, in the Catholic Church.
Oh, no.
Right? The Catholic Church is not completely celibate leadership till much later, but it has influence. By the way, it's not just Paul.
Took her off.
It is in Jewish groups. The Dead Sea Scroll groups are celibate. They're completely separate communities for the men, separate communities for the women. They do not mix. They do not marry. Right? There are no what we call Dead Sea Scroll Jews anymore because of that. Right? No marriage, no children. Boom, they're dead end. They vanished. Somewhere around shortly after the destruction of the first temple, they just vanished. They probably, in all probability, blended into the early Christian community. That's the theory. Community called the Ebionites in Greek and Roman sources, from the Hebrew word evion, meaning poor. Poor not in money, but poor in giving up one's wealth and possessions and so on in that sense. So, Paul is not anti-Jews, but he becomes anti-Judaism. Let's put it that way. So,
Same thing.
his conception of life is Jewish. You look at it says his unparalleled animosity and hostility to Judaism, as voiced in the epistles, can be accounted for only on the assumption while born a Jew, he was never in sympathy or in touch with the doctrines of the rabbinical schools. In other words, Paul says in his introduction to the people that he's preaching to that he is raised as a Pharisee. But the way he talks, Kohler says, does not indicate somebody who really believed it. He may have been familiar with it, he may have dabbled in it, but it did not talk to him. Didn't talk to him. All right? Now, later we'll see, is it that he really meant this for everyone or only for the Gentiles? That's still under debate. Let's go a little bit into his personality. All right? Personality-wise. Is this a man who eventually bent the world to his thinking? Think about it. Of a fiery temper, impulsive and impassioned, effusive and excessive alike in his love and in his hatred. Either loves people tremendously or is lambasting them. His blessings and his curses. Possessed a marvelous power over men and had unbounded confidence in himself. The philosopher and the Jew will greatly differ from him with regard to every argument and view, but will admit he is a mighty battler for truth. All right? He puts his life on line. He's executed by the Romans later on. And his view of life, of man and God, profoundly serious one. The entire conception of religion certainly been deepened by him because his mental grasp was wide and comprehensive, his thinking bold, aggressive, and searching, sometimes systematic. Indeed, he molded the thought and belief of all Christendom. I think that the parallel to Paul in Jewish circles is with the story of Shabtai Tzvi. In other words, you have a charismatic figure under Jesus. Jesus is dead. And there's no message out of that per se yet. Paul creates a message. And the same thing, as I say, the one parallel we have is with Shabtai Tzvi. Shabtai Tzvi, around 1600, 1600s, is a very charismatic figure, possibly what we would understand bipolar mentality, very up and very down, engaged in bizarre acts. Be dancing with the Torah and then married a prostitute. Things, very bizarre acts, very weird. And it bothered him, and he knew that he wasn't well. So he went to the great Kabbalistic thinker of his day, Nathan of Gaza. Yeah, Gaza today, there's not a single Jew alive in Gaza today, right? At that time, Gaza was, and still remained for a long time, a large settlement of Jews in the land of Israel. And so Nathan of Gaza is there, this Shavtai Tzvi comes to him. He comes down from Jerusalem to Gaza, and Nathan looks at him and says, "Aha, you are the embodiment of the Mashiach, the Messiah." And it is Nathan of Gaza who looks at this personality of Shavtai Tzvi and creates an entire theology around him, in which, by engaging in bizarre acts, Shavtai Tzvi is liberating the world from the Nitzutzot HaKodesh, the sparks of divinity that were trapped inside the realm of the dark side, the evil side, the Sitra Achara. You have to go into Kabbalistic thought. But why do I say this? Because I was this guy, Nathan of Gaza, that now a new concept of Judaism arises, so that Shavtai Tzvi goes and becomes a Muslim, and Nathan of Gaza can explain it as part of this mysterious battle against the forces of evil. Right? So again, you have the figure, and then you have the preacher, the ideologist who is building a whole structure, complete new structure. That's the closest we can have. Okay. Why was Jesus? Paul came in then to the Jewish community. The story around it is that he's going to. He hangs around with the Pharisaic circles. They want to persecute the early Christians. This is what Paul says, and they send him on a mission to arrest someone, and he's going on his way to Damascus, and all of a sudden in Damascus he has the vision, and it is the vision of Jesus, and suddenly he becomes a believer. Whatever the case may be, was he really a rabbinic Jew, not really a rabbinic Jew in the first place? He looks at the church around him, or the early Jewish Christian synagogue, whatever we call it, and he sees the Jewish followers, and he sees non-Jews who are beginning to hang in. And to the Jewish followers, he realizes he doesn't have any message. To the Gentile followers, he realizes that maybe he's got something to them, and he focuses on them. Now, where did these non-Jews come from? Jesus, who is a Jewish nationalist, very much in the New Testament, is angry at the Pharisees. And he says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You travel over land and sea to win a single convert. When you have succeeded, you make him twice as much a child of hell as you are." Oh, so Pharisees are the dominant Jewish force of his day. Jesus sets himself against them because they're not good enough. They're hypocritical in his eyes. And you're going to go and convert Gentiles to Judaism. He has another line. Where a pagan, there's a pagan woman who comes to him. She needs him to create a miracle. And at first he says, it is not fit to throw food to the dogs. That's how he responds to the Gentile, to the pagan. Then she says, but you. And he says, okay, because you believe in me, so I will heal you. We understand this. Underlying is a strong Jewish nationalism. With that kind of attitude, you're not going to make it in the Gentile world, right? Paul is looking at this question. He sees these hanger-on, and what is going to bring them into the fold? The big obstacle is mitzvot, masiyot, obligations of Judaism. Judaism has very difficult obligations, right? He finds that many Gentiles have accepted much of Jewish practice, but not all. So also Gentile women in particular. It was easier for a Gentile woman to become a Jew because she didn't have to undergo circumcision as an adult, and that can be a big pain, right? So Kohler himself says Gentiles were coming to Judaism anyway. Why did we need to change Judaism to do it? Right? This is, what Paul was trying to do was to eliminate this different status for the proselyte, for the Gentile who came into the Jewish ranks. Yeah. So he would make sure that the Gentile would rank equally with other members. The marks of distinction with Jew and Gentile had to be wiped out. You have to eliminate any distinction. And those mitzvot masiyot then become an obstacle, right? That's part of the factor that goes into his thinking. So Paul fashioned a Christ of his own, a church of his own, system belief of his own. And he had mythological and Gnostic elements in his theology, appealed more to the non-Jew than to the Jew. He won the heathen world to his beliefs. Right? There's his standing. Let me see how far we're going. I've got a lot of other notes here, so I'm not going to take the full hour, but I'm going to leave you sort of hanging at this point. You start to see this split. So we talk about the significance, talk about a Jewish world bringing or exposing itself to the Gentile world, to the Greek and Roman world. Ideas from the Greek and Roman world coming into Jewish circles. And we'll see now how Paul will come in next week. We'll go into this next week. What is the big change? What is the big shift that he makes? And so we'll just follow up because there's a lot to do. I mean, we're setting up an entirely new civilization. So you can't set up a new civilization and explain it in just the time we have. So we're going to go on to that. Any questions up to this point? All right.
Good job.
Huh?
Good job. Thank you.
Okay. So next week, I'm going to go back into finish up with Paul. Then after that, I'm going to go to the first real Jewish philosopher, Saadia Gaon, that nobody knows about, more so than Philo of Alexandria. And then we're hitting mid-January, go into Tu B'Shvat.
Yay!
Also. That's right. So we'll all pretend we're eating. And then we'll follow through from that. Okay, so I'm going to close this down. As I said, we'll follow up next week on the rest of it.
Shabbat shalom all.
Okay, to everybody, Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom,
Okay.
Rabbi.
Anybody want to go on and have any other discussions? You're welcome
Shabbat
to.
shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Yeah.
Shabbat
Shimon,
shalom,
Simon.
Rabbi.
Yeah, they're good. Yoni, you want to carry it on from here, or? Oh, you're on the mute.
Oh, shoot.
Huh? Yeah. Yoni, you want to take over if anybody wants to chat on?
Made a mistake.
Shabbat shalom, Yoni.
There we go. You're on.
Shalom, everybody.
Yoni's on silent. Okay. All right. So if that's the case, we'll call it for this Shabbat. Thursday. No hard drink. Huh?
I think Young is gone.
Yeah. Okay. No hard drinking, please.
I could not hear what the Gabbai said. Can you repeat?
I have a question. Okay, if we drink hard and let's say we get arrested for drunk driving, I know our courts aren't meeting either, right? There's no jury duty nowadays.
I think they're doing trials, virtual trials. I think they're able to do some kind of trials.
Because
Yeah.
I understand that there's no jury selection these days.
No. But I think they can do some kinds of trials. There's certain
So
cases where
if
they don't
we-
need a jury.
if we
By
get
the
a-
way, on partying, I have to tell you this. I sort of get it off my chest. Take these isolation rules seriously. On my street, there was a party last Sunday evening. Somebody hosted, and I know the couple, traditional young Orthodox couple with children, and they must have had some kind of gathering of family and friends, and it was going on a little bit too loud and maybe too many people. And 11 o'clock at night, which is past the curfew of 10 o'clock, the fire alarm went off in our building. Fire alarm went off in our building, so ambulance comes, fire alarm comes, fire trucks come, and they discover there are too many people gathered in this building. And suddenly police show up, and maybe somebody complained about it, there was too much noise. And all of a sudden I'm looking out the window and I see the two young couple, everybody's being let out of the building. They're being handcuffed, backs to the police car while they're being frisked. And the looks like SWAT teams with rifles out and so on. Probably curse the day they thought of doing this. So please take these rules seriously and carefully, and do not mess with police. I don't care what the story is about police and ethnic. If you're out of line, you're out of line. There was another case on my block a few months ago where some woman was knocking on somebody's door, and somebody felt that she was harassing them, called the police. And so instead of talking to the police nicely and going along, she was screaming and shouting and arguing, and she was on the ground. They talked to her about an hour, nicely, very patiently, and suddenly she started screaming and shouting and resisting them, and they put her on the ground. They had 5 officers sitting on top of her. So you see how easily that could get out of line. How easily.
But
So I
usually
just
there
tell
are
her, please play careful with the police.
Yeah. Usually in synagogues, they got people that are lawyers or attorneys or judges and stuff like that. And as far as I know, if you get arrested now, you're going to stay in jail longer, because as far as I know, a lot of our court system, our criminal justice system is on limbo right now.
Right. Except your DA now, your new DA lets everybody off.
Right.
I don't know.
That Gascon. By the way, he had to retract his first edict about parolees because his own the deputy DAs under him got on his back because he said you're letting child molesters out, and he had to undo. I don't know how we voted him in. So anyway, what can I tell you? Please
people just got angry at Lacey, the former DA. We just got very angry at her because her husband.
There was a problem with him.
He waved a weapon at protesters that were marching past his home.
I don't think that was what really did the vote. It was that Gascon promised everybody, I'm going to clear the jails. I'm going to redeem everybody. We're going to, everything is good. Do you know that and I see this, they don't persecute. If you have shoplifted less than $900 from a store, $925 from a store, they're not going to go after you. And so I see people shoplifting. I watch it in stores. They walk out the stores. They can kick them out of the store. They can't call the police and do anything. That's, it's one of the problems that we have. Serious problems.
But as I understand it, nowadays people are shoplifting loaves of bread and stuff like that. They're not.
This is before the virus. You know what? Before with the virus, and some people are in desperate straits, even with the homeless. They're more. I can understand, but before the virus, no excuse. There was no. There's food. It wasn't what they were shoplifting for. It was very nice cosmetics. I saw it in my own eyes. So the guard went after her, so she ran around the corner, dropped the basket, and left. She wasn't going to fight about it, but I saw it. So anyway, all of us stay well, stay safe. We had this tragic scene in Nashville where someone committed newspapers have not yet reported.
It reminds me of Oklahoma City back in the 90s when the federal building got bombed in Oklahoma City.
Similar, because he used a truck bomb.
Tim McVeigh guy.
Right.
That's what it reminds me of, leaving a truck with explosives and just, that's what it reminds me of.
Told everyone to
so he knew, whoever did it, I assume, knew there were not going to be a lot of civilians around because it was Christmas morning. The report was that there was sounds of shooting, so police were drawn to the area. So maybe the idea was to create a trap to attack police. Possible, but who knows? It's hard to know. What was apparently, for instance, one of the officers there on the scene looked at the art view and he saw something that raised a suspicion, and he warned people not to go near, and then it went off. So that spared probably a lot of lives. But we have this season. Look, we remember the Unabomber, the guy who had the manifesto, its ideological manifesto. Right. So you've got people who are absolutely convinced of their absolute righteousness, and in the course of their absolute righteousness, create absolute evil. That's probably the most dangerous. The guy who robs and kills because he wants your money or something like that, at least you can understand. But the one who says, I'm doing it because I'm going to save you, right? I'm going to save society. That's maybe the bigger danger always. Okay, so with that, let's have a safe and happy year and a healthy year. and 2021,
I don't wanna
hopefully a
spend
year
any more,
of
but, yeah, I don't want to spend any more.
safety and recovery for everybody.
Yeah,
You're
Thank
right.
you.
Amen.
thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Amen.
Same to you.